You're listening to Mystic Lounge with Alan B. Smith. Rebroadcast on the Onyx Network. Thursdays at 11 p.m. Pacific. Fridays at 2 a.m. Eastern.
However you are and whenever you are, welcome, good souls, to Mystic Lounge. I'm Alan B. Smith, your grateful host. Joining me tonight is Nathaniel Gillis, demonologist. He is an author, he's a lecturer, and he's a really, really cool guy. So hang in, he'll be here with us in just a moment. As a friendly reminder, this podcast is rebroadcast on the Onyx Network at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Eastern Daylight Time, and 11 Pacific time, Thursday nights. So yeah, this is going to be a really interesting one. Honestly, I don't remember the last time we've talked about demons specifically per se. So we really do have a fantastic guest tonight joining us. As a friendly reminder, if you could support this channel by liking, subscribing, sharing your thoughts, and commenting down below, all of that really helps the channel and the podcast grow. And of course, if you listen to this on iTunes, please rate and give it a review there. On social media, you can find Mystic Lounge at paranormal_now on Twitter or X, and at paranormal now on Instagram. All right, so let's bring on Nathaniel Gillis. He is a demonologist, author, and lecturer. After living in a haunted house, Nathaniel spent 20 years researching what it was he encountered. Nathaniel has sought to redefine the nature of haunting phenomena, ghosts, and high strangeness. As one of the thought leaders in his field, Nathaniel's hypothesis is not that aliens are demons, but that a singular intelligence has worn both as masks in which to hide. In fact, he is often quoted for his concept of the phenomena, quote, "The reason they are playing by different rules is because they are playing by a different game." Nathaniel, welcome to Mystic Lounge, brother. How are you?
Thank you for having me on. It's always great to make new friends and to meet new people. And of course, thank you for having me on to discuss my research. It's a real pleasure.
Absolutely. Well, let's start with that encounter,
Mhm.
and we'll take it from there. So what was that encounter that you had, the first one?
So my encounter, my confrontation with this phenomenon began at the young age of 8 years old. I moved into a new house, and that house was basically possessed by a malevolent being. And once I experienced that haunting, it was very strange. I mean, being an 8-year-old kid, the only thing I knew to do was to play basketball, play video games. I had no frame of reference for
Mhm.
anything remotely close to what we're going to talk about tonight. But what I realized was that whatever entity this was, it was almost like it was projecting a fear upon me. It
Mm.
was fabricating terror, and then it would feed off of the trauma it created on me. It's very, very weird.
How do you know it
But
wasn't your imagination? What distinguished
Oh,
it
I'll
for
tell
you?
you what's fascinating. So, one of the very first phenomena that I encountered was a full-blown conversation going on above my head at night. And so I'd
Mm.
wake up at nighttime and I could hear two things. That's the only way I know how to describe them, talking back and forth to each other.
Yeah.
Um, a host of other things, shadow figures that were witnessed in the house. When I would go to bed at nighttime, you could hear a weight displacing itself on the wooden floors.
Hmm.
Just a tremendous amount of manifestation, but I experienced it, and then it wasn't until later on in the field, I mean, now that I started realizing that's called DVP, direct voice phenomena. And your
Mm.
parapsychologists realize, I mean, they have captured it in audio before, and they believe in Steve Barry Fitzgerald will talk about that. Where forget EVPs, when you get
Mm.
DVP, direct voice phenomena, that's literally it's always above your head, and usually rather, and they converse with each other, and so it was saturated. It wasn't my imagination. I wish it was. But the older I became, the more I realized, and others did as well, this wasn't just something I had just made up in my mind. It wasn't psychosis, that there was something actually in that house that was either attempting to communicate
Right.
or was just manifesting a malevolent haunting. Very strange stuff.
Were you raised Catholic?
No, no, it
No.
wasn't.
Because
No, excuse me. So, no, I was raised evangelical, though. And
Mm.
I've since emancipated myself from a lot of the stringent rules I grew up in. But it was strange, I mean, going through that and then going to a local church and saying, hello, Mr. Youth Pastor, what do you do about shadow people? Yeah, didn't go
Right,
over very
but
well.
wouldn't they just immediately assume you're talking about a demon in
That's
their
what, yes,
worldview, right?
absolutely, absolutely. And so it was such a contradiction and a juxtaposition because when you go, like you said, when you go there, okay, this is what I'm witnessing,
Hmm.
smoky apparitions, just different manifestations. They would, of course, they would lump them all underneath the umbrella of being horns and hooves. And so I grew up kind of listening to that,
Hmm.
experiencing the phenomenon. And then later on, my father took up pastoralship. And then it's fascinating, he would fly over Hebrew scholars from Israel. And so here I am eating dinner with some of the most famous and top of the field religious scholars in the world. And I'm
Hmm.
picking their brain. We're eating Chipotle, Alan, and a good old Chipotle. And I'm like, hey, what do you think about demons? What do you think about different manifestations and different mythologies? And what I realized was that not only has the evangelical world highlighted the phenomenon as all horns and hooves, but the phenomenon itself has allowed itself to be viewed as that
How
in
do we
many cases.
distinguish the fiction from what you're convinced is the reality?
Hmm.
Because, like you said, the horns, right? So
Right.
demons come from a long history of interpretation, and horns were
Hmm.
often just the pagan gods,
Right.
right?
It
And
was
so
a sign
that's
of divinity or deity. Yeah.
yeah.
Strange.
So if the horns were just a sign of pagan gods, were the pagan gods really demons,
Well,
or what is that? What's the thought there?
one thing is very, very obvious here. When you get into the literature, our ancestors did encounter something. That intelligence did manipulate them. It
Hmm.
did things to them. It created a hybridization program in biblical antiquity and Mesopotamian text. We can get to those in a little bit. But they did encounter something. And,
Hmm.
and one thing that I've been able to look for and hopefully nail it down is that there are certain behavioral patterns that the phenomenon manifests and has manifested throughout history. Now,
Hmm.
what has happened to us culturally is we've used what's called mythopoetry or mythology and poetry as one.
Right.
And so, whereas we have technology in antiquity, they would just rock their kids to sleep, or they would tell stories around the campfire and say, "This is exactly what your mother encountered, or this is exactly what I encountered." And
Hmm.
so, depending on if it was a negative experience or if it was a positive experience, that's where they put the phenomenon. If it's a good message, it's an angel. If it terrified me, well, it must have been a demon. And
Right.
so, it was in this time in history where they began to personify evil, personifications of evil, where like natural events would take place. Oh my God, it's the demon of fever. We,
Hmm.
we know there's not a demon of fever, right? But that doesn't mean they were not experiencing entities that were haunting and doing things to them that were not very pleasant sometimes.
In a way, I guess you can say demons were assigned roles not unlike saints are, right? Like
Right.
the saint of this or the saint of that. There was like the demon of this, the demon of that.
Correct, correct. And then sometimes you would have Lamanche who she would descend down in the middle of the night and she would you see highlights of UFO abduction and incubi succubi encounter
Yeah.
where she would stare into the eyes of the woman would go to bed with a child inside the womb and then the next morning it's gone. And so they would, yeah, this is fascinating stuff, but it's important too. But they would actually create second faces out of iron and they would wear it around their necks as a religious amulet, hoping that when they were a child, that when that entity would descend down, it would stare into the wrong eyes, meaning the next morning the child that they were pregnant with would still be with them. And so the missing fetus syndrome, it's not a new phenomenon. It's
Hmm.
just being documented in a new light. We have that in biblical antiquity. We have that in Mesopotamian texts. We had that in the 16th century. And so, what I've basically done is approach the phenomenon like a serial killer that wears many aliases and masks. Yet, in each new incarnation, it just reincorporates its own agenda.
Hmm.
And we've seen that. I could prove that tonight. But that's when I realized, okay, some of these are the result of feverish fancies and sexual appetites, just this weird psychological, sociological makeup. At other times, no, there's something very real occurring. because we've seen the same behavioral pattern throughout history, and it's still occurring to this day.
So to go back, did you have an encounter with what you consider a shadow person or
Yes.
a demon?
I don't know what it was. The shadow person that I witnessed was playing a video game at night. All the lights are off. I'm watching this bright screen. I
Mhm.
saw movement out of the corner of my right eye. I just looked, and when you know how when your eyes adjust to the darkness, there I am. I see this thing looking at me through the window,
Mhm.
featureless. And I just remember, okay, focusing on him, and all of a sudden, when I did, he just turned its head. That's when I just lost it. I ran in my parents' room, freaking out. That was in the wintertime. The next morning, I went outside, and there were footprints, like boot prints, outside in front of my window.
Yeah.
Now, the strangest thing is my window sill was about 7 foot tall. So whatever it was, this gets again into how science fails us. It was a shadow figure, but it was physically there, which is very strange.
So in between worlds, in a sense.
Yes, the interdimensionality of this phenomenon cannot be ignored.
Mhm.
When I do lectures, I say that they're present with but absent from, and we cannot discount the paradoxical nature.
Mhm.
Right? I mean, with ufology, you know, even with aliens, they would walk
Yeah.
through the wall and then solidify to the touch. So there is this kind of in between liminal space that I believe
Mhm.
they exist in, that we are completely. I mean, I'm not saying I am. I know I am, but maybe our government knows. But whatever, wherever they are, I do believe it's the in between.
Are they evil, inherently evil, these things?
Man, you're hitting me hard with the good questions already. So I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
This is where my colleagues and I are at.
Mhm.
There is a profound amount of deception occurring.
Mhm.
Now, if we look at the capabilities of the phenomenon, it's almost like we have the real thing, and then we have some kind of intelligence that mimics the real thing for its own purposes. So,
Mhm.
in my research and my case studies, mainly I've been dealing with incubi and succubi victims.
Okay.
And you want me to go into that a little bit? What maybe what an
Sure.
incubi is? Okay,
Mhm.
so what an incubus is, it's an entity that appears to women in the images of a man. Usually, it's in the image of a lover, someone they've been with in the past, or a deceased husband,
Mhm.
or someone they're even with today. And so, primarily, that's what my about the last 2 or 3 years of my research has been centered around, is
Mhm.
dealing with experiences of this phenomenon, getting through the trauma, putting marriages back together again, and helping them understand their experience. But to answer your question more specifically, I do believe that this is a singular intelligence and that the way it deceives us is alarming. And, you know, I've done other shows before where the question is, okay, we know they're deceiving us. That's not a question. You know, we know, like with Ted Rice, we know that wasn't his real grandfather that tried to assault him as a child. It was an entity
Mhm.
that had used the cognitive interface of someone that this individual knew in order to garner some form, and I say this loosely because it's not consent,
Mhm.
but in another way, it really is trying to get them to go along with the agenda that they want to employ.
Yeah.
So deception is at hand. The question is, are they deceiving us for our own good?
Mm. That's that. Well, in that particular instance, I couldn't. That's too dramatic. I don't know how good that is. 'Cause it's the same argument that you have with the alien abduction phenomena, right? Like, is
Well, yes, I would suggest to everybody that the esoteric nature of this phenomenon cannot be understated.
Mhm.
These beings, long before they were poking their, you know, walking into rooms at nighttime, they were coming to tables of seances, necromancers,
Mhm.
spiritualists, esoteric rituals.
Yeah.
And so when we realize that, then okay, it's not what you call me, it's what I answer to. That's when I started to kind of look at this phenomenon and say,
Mm.
okay, what would an ET have to do with esoteric rites from Bromwell and the Mage and Eliphas Levi? And unless there is some kind of connection
Mhm.
between the two that they either don't want us to know of, and so they say, okay, yeah, focus on the skies and the technology, not realizing there's something deeply spiritual in all of this. You know, it has to be, or else they're just responding to anything and everything, which is not the case.
Are we working from a handicap?
Oh,
Meaning,
absolutely.
meaning that the old literature, the majority of it, Western literature on demonology comes from essentially the Catholic Church.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's where the greatest, you've got the grimoires and these other texts and whatnot where they've been written about. And so there is this sort of interpretation that they're these evil things, but then if you look at the Bible, like the book of Job, Lucifer has to get permission from God to, I forget what the trick Job or to give him some kind of like
tempt him and all that. Yeah. You can't kill him.
To give him like some kind of like torture of some sort. I forget what it was, like some skin thing or whatever. But like, so if Lucifer needed permission from God to be able to do these certain things, because in God's will, it's like, well, it's about tempting man and humans, right? Like, can this man or woman resist? Can they still speak my name when they're suffering? So this sounds to me like if Satan is a tool then of God, then wouldn't a demon then be a tool?
Well, according to that form of demonology, but again, the earliest texts regarding these beings were that they were basically ascended masters. And then in Hebrew consciousness, they started to reintegrate, reincorporate some of the Mesopotamian literature. And then you have in Lamentations, Moses saying you sacrifice to gods that were no gods, comma, two gods. Wait a minute, they weren't gods. Two gods who recently appeared. What I would suggest is this, I learned this early on in my research because I had to. Absolutely. Caleb, my buddy. Yes. Thank you for tuning in, my friend. I told you we're going to have some people from my neck of the woods, man. Amazing. Yeah. So
thanks for joining, Caleb.
Okay. So here's the deal. When you look at the phenomenon, what it can do and when it can't, what it knows, what it can produce in a life, a lot of these, and I should say it like this, diabolical dogmatism, a lot of that, even the dogmatists that I grew up listening to, the phenomenon is eclipsing their microcosm. And here's why. Let me just throw out a case study to you. And for those who.
Sure.
All right. So I was doing a lecture one night on skin anomalies and scarifications during possessions and hauntings and how it correlates tremendously with UFO abduction phenomenon. And an individual reached out to me and said, listen, a lot of these scarifications and religious amulets, they sound a lot like what my late father experienced when he would go out of his body and meet his guides. This is when my paradigm shifted. And it was like, okay, I have to re-examine everything I've been taught.
Yeah.
And even that which I grew up wanting to believe these beings were. This blew my mind. I said, okay, so we got on the phone and he's telling me his story. He said, well, my father would go and meet his guides. He would go out of his body and he would get prophecies, words of knowledge, all kinds of just things regarding the Armageddon and eschatology. And he said one night his dad got back into his body. He was doing a session. And then he said he came walking down the stairs. He was incoherent. He was pale and he was just inconsolable. And he had a massive heart attack. And he said, when we took him to the hospital, they said that we were looking at his chest. And he said it just began to turn red. And from underneath the skin, subdermally, there were these 3 religious amulets that came from underneath the skin to the surface.
Oh. This is a real story.
It's a real story. Yes, I have photographs of it. Now, here's what's the most interesting, okay? Subdermal scarifications, they're not new. We usually see them in malevolent hauntings with scratches. There's a burning sensation. Sometimes it's on the skin, through the skin to the bottom, to the inside of it. A lot of times it's subdermal. It moves from underneath the skin to the surface. Now, this particular experiencer said that when he met his guides, that he realized that they were not his guides at all. That they were entities that had lined themselves up in a metallic room. And when he started conversing with them, out of body, he said next thing he knows, he slammed back into his body. Now, my main point here is important. One was an Egyptian hieroglyphic that arched its way over top. One was the Jewish Star of David, and the other one was the cross. What
Mhm.
I realized was that even our esotericism is limited because the way that these beings employ amulets is completely alien to what demonology would even consider. These are antithetical religious traditions. You will not have a Jewish rabbi employing the cross. You won't. You will not have a priest employing the Jewish Star of David. They're two different religious mythologies.
Sure. Mhm.
And you certainly won't have either of them employing Egyptian hieroglyphics. So whatever we're dealing with or whatever they're employing against us, it's like I
Mhm.
said, it's eclipsing demonology. That's when I said, okay, yes, I do have texts, but as far as I'm concerned, some of them have to do with their origin,
Mhm.
the origin of these beings. What I'm looking for are behavioral patterns. What are they doing?
What's the significance of those three symbols?
I'm not sure yet. Honestly, I'm not sure yet. I still haven't been able to translate the Egyptian hieroglyphic. The closest to two things, really. The closest to this case I've heard of was a case that Steve Mera had. But
Mhm.
in addition to that, there's a book behind me by Brahman the Mage, who was a sage. He was a magician. This is where a lot of Levi's research come from, and even the bastardized Kabbalistic text that Aleister Crowley took some of his rights from. But anyways, Brahman the Mage says this. He's like, he goes, I've scoured the world studying religious amulets. And he said this is fascinating. He said at the end of his life, he came across a being or a magician that was performing angel magic, and the way he was doing that was taking hieroglyphics,
Mhm.
the Jewish Star of David, and then the cross, and mixing them together in some kind of cocktail. It
Hmm.
makes no sense to us because we've compartmentalized it.
Well, also because if it's angel magic, one would assume that that existed before Christianity even
Mhm.
existed, right?
Right,
Or
right.
Judaism, for that matter.
Correct. And this is another complexity that has almost driven me mad. When you look at even Mariolatry, when you look at the Church of Satan and some of the dark sorcery rites and all that stuff, the incantations,
Hmm.
Mariolatry began with the worship of Mary, and then as soon as that took place, there were sorcerers who began to mock Mariolatry and employ that in their rituals.
Hmm.
So there is something to the human belief that plays a role in this phenomenon. And but I agree. So I don't know what it all means. What it told me though, more than anything, was okay. They're not playing by our rules.
This reminds me a little bit of the idea that the observer effect, that
Mhm.
reality, according to seems physics, quantum physics, that
Mhm.
without the consciousness observing reality, it doesn't coalesce. It doesn't exist
Right.
in the way we
Absolutely.
perceive it. Um, and so, what does that mean about time, right? So,
Mhm.
is it possible that these other things are able to perceive time in a different way than we are, and that
Yeah.
that their reality is somewhat dependent upon us?
Yeah. Anyway, yes, there is a symbiotic and embryonic relationship that they have with us.
Mm,
This gets back to the nature of the phenomenon and the way it's manipulated us through centuries. Let's get back to some of the research I was doing about 5 years ago. When you get into these case studies, and I've had more than a few of them, where
mhm,
let's just say that a woman goes to bed at night and she thinks it's her husband, and they have a physical encounter, and then only afterwards she realizes that there are certain facial features that this being is demonstrating that does
mhm,
not belong to her husband of 30 years. There is this role playing aspect. I call it a protocol of belief that the phenomenon will strap us into. And the question is begged, do you believe I am who I appear to be?
mm,
Right? And it's falling right into your theory here because it's okay. I'm not just observing it, I have a role to play in this encounter. I had a case in India where a woman was approached 7 different times by the phenomenon, and it was like it appeared as every man she'd ever been with. and it was almost like working her like a safe. Okay, do you believe I am? And each time she's like, okay, no, there's something off. I know this is not who you're trying to appear as.
Mhm.
And so I think that's where we're at. But there is this protocol of belief, the phenomenon puts us in, where unless you believe I am who I appear to be,
Mhm.
there's a snag in the program.
So it's like a program that's running,
Mhm.
and it's reliant upon another program to interact with
Well,
it, or
it's very similar. In Eros and Evil, Ariel Masters, this is incredible. This is another game changer for my research. It blew my mind. It was like, okay, you got to think of it differently. So I did.
yeah. Mhm.
But so here's the deal. So this is what I mean when the phenomenon will play into roles. Okay, you want me to be a demon? Sure. Want me to be okay? Fine. I'll be an alien. I'll be Dear and Edna as well. I'll be your guide. I'll be an
Mhm.
angel. I could be whatever I want to be in order to get you where I want you to go. So
Yeah.
in this particular case study, um, Dr. Collar Turner, she had a case. This is very interesting too. I forgot the other case study, but I'll kind of snag that and connect it as well.
Yeah, sure.
But Ted Rice was an experiencer that had worked with Dr. Collar Turner, and he was abducted along with his grandmother. It was during this case study that this entity tried to mate with the grandmother, and she saw through the veil. Okay, yeah, whatever. I'm not doing that. And she said, I've only been intimate with one man. It's my husband. He's been deceased now. And so
Mhm.
suddenly, wouldn't you know, from the shadows emerges her deceased husband. This is what I mean when
And
the phenomenal play roles.
is that something like a tulpa?
I don't think it's kind of what I
Mhm.
think they're doing though is plucking images out of our mind and stepping into those.
Okay.
It's just like I had a case where a woman was told me that she was abducted in her youth by
Mhm.
Mickey Mouse, and what they were doing is pulling an image out of her childlike mind because there was no YouTube, it was just video games, cartoons, and
Mhm.
she said what it began to take place was that the image never grew, it never aged, but she would grow and age. And so it came to a point one day, real quick, she was just like, "Okay, this can't be you. Like this, I don't even watch cartoons anymore.
Yeah.
I used to." So there was this game, and I'll finish with this real quick.
I
She
still
said
do
that
sometimes, but
I love it, man. I love it. Yeah. But she said that there was a moment when she started to disbelieve
Mhm.
in the image. And she said, next thing she knows, its eyes got bigger and it began
Mhm.
to, and this is the words, it began to measure her belief. Very strange. And then then the next day or the next time it would appear different, is what I'm saying.
Okay. This sounds very similar to alien encounters.
Yep.
So
Sadly.
do you think that there are similarities because sometimes one of the other is the same,
Yes.
and or are there also separate realities? Are there actual extraterrestrials
Mhm.
coming from afar or from another dimension, whatever have you? But
Yeah.
that's like a real separate thing, not the same thing as a spiritual entity of some sort.
Well, I think we're dealing with both. But to answer your question specifically, I do personally, me, Nathaniel Gillis, does not. I'm not really buying into the ET hypothesis.
Mm,
I think what's happened throughout history is when they appeared as Dear and Edna, they'll play the long game. And so, one case was like, okay, yeah, this psychic believed it was his mother, his deceased mother was giving him all these signs and
mhm,
guidance and all that. And then 26 years later, it did something or told him to do something that went against the religious creed and was
mhm.
antithetical to what his mother would have believed. And so that's when he pushed back on it. It revealed itself. It was not his mother at all. So if we're going to believe they are everything that they have appeared to us as,
Mhm.
why are we picking the alien?
Well, because that's what we're seeing now. I mean,
Mhm.
it's just like, we have a mutual friend, Heidi Hollis, and
Correct.
I always quote her.
Love you, Heidi.
She makes a really good point.
Mhm.
She's like, they give me a license because I pass a test. They trust my eyes that when I'm driving down the road, I can recognize a bear crossing the road. I can recognize a deer. I can recognize a red light.
Mhm.
My eyes are working fine. So you have all these people who are just regular people going about their lives, their eyes are fine,
Mhm.
and they have this experience with an alien, extraterrestrial.
Mhm.
And it can be a very physical experience, but it could also be that liminal dreamlike state experience as well.
Correct.
But you have people who have very physical experiences, or so they report, right? You don't think that would be an extraterrestrial, like a physical, biological, or
Well, okay, this is again, we find this in the field that's pervasive because a lot of people, and I'm going to be very honest with you and very blunt,
Mhm.
and I've seen this from UFO Twitter and other people I've come across the field. When they say that these beings can't be aliens because they have bodies, what they're doing is applying 21st century Catholic demonology to a phenomenon that has stretched its draconian shadow this way throughout millennia. Demons have had bodies. That's the whole necessity of a hybridization program. Create a baby, place my consciousness in it. Now I have a biological avatar.
Yeah.
These beings have told us that's what they're doing in many cases.
Yeah, I'm laughing because when you said that, it reminded me of Kevin Smith's Dogma movie, and you had those
Yeah,
those kids that were hockey players with the hockey
yeah.
sticks. Like just I just see these demon children. I mean, that do you think that's a real thing? Do you think that there are demons incarnate in human bodies like that?
Well, I think that's the nature of possession, and this is why, again, that a lot of people, and I do get it kind of gets old with me because I know the literature and I know the Mesopotamian texts and the origins of this mythology and what they do.
Mhm.
Well, that can't be demons, and they riddle off something they found on a bumper sticker in a Trader Joe's parking lot. And nothing against that, but if you're going to make a point, not you, I'm saying them,
Mhm.
especially on UFO Twitter. Well, I know demonology. It's like okay, yeah, unless we get down to it, and then it's like, wait a minute, they were doing this stuff forever. Yes, they've been taking women and planting fetuses in their bodies for thousands and thousands of years. We know that. So it's
So
like, okay, now we have to move forward. Yep.
let's
Good.
go pre Abrahamic,
Yep.
and go back 6,000 plus,
Hmm.
right,
Yes.
years. Um, is there evidence of demons existing before that? Because
Well.
demons, for the most part, as we understand them or speak of them, are within
Mhm.
the you know the paradigm of what the Catholic Church
Correct.
has spread.
Correct. So the earliest mythology regarding what a demon was, it was never called a demon. They were called Rephaites or Rephaim. And so in your Ugaritic text, they were called the Repiumai.
Yeah. Shout out
And
to Caleb for calling that out earlier.
there we
Thank you.
go. Yeah, yeah, yeah. He follows my research, so he knows. Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. But yeah, so basically this is where like the two arguments regarding what demons were kind of split.
Mhm.
The first hypothesis was that these were deceased ancestors that had, instead of evolving after death, they mutated and they used all of their knowledge that they gained in life against the human species. And so then you have the Rephaim in biblical antiquity. But
Mhm.
what were they? It was consciousness. It was consciousness. And so what the authors began to describe, it doesn't matter if you're talking about the Testament of Reuben, the Damascus document, I'm just going to riddle off a bunch of it, whatever. Um, Essentially, what all of these people expressed was, okay, we were just sitting down one day and these beings showed up.
Mhm.
Well, what were they doing? Well, it doesn't really matter what religious tradition it was. They were after babies. They wanted hybrid children. And so they would take the seed from a man, hello, UFO abduction, and then take it to a woman, hello, UFO abduction, inseminate her with the fetus, and then take the fetus for themselves. Now, it got so prevalent
Mhm.
that we find this ritual or this modus operandi implemented during high Sabbaths and through esoteric rituals.
Mhm.
Sorcerers begin to implement these tactics as a way to progress throughout life. Matter of fact, it's called the Red Right. It's back up here. It's called the Golden Bow, written by James Fraser. It talks about this where this phenomenon was so prevalent that ancient warriors, when they realized, like if they were on the battlefield and they died, have a mortal wound, they would dispossess their own body and place their consciousness in someone else. this began this whole mythology of possession. What is possession, really? It's not just the relocation of consciousness, it's the replication of life. And so it kind of bleeds its way into.
Interesting. Yeah.
I don't want to ramble. I tend to ramble because usually people just
No.
that's like, all right.
That's a new thought. I haven't thought of it that way. The replication of life. It's replicating over top. It's like, the old VHS cassette tapes. It's like you're just kind of recording over top of someone else's consciousness.
Absolutely, yeah. So you see their pathologies change, and it evolves throughout history, where in what's called the oh Lord. No, but basically what they were going to do is they were trying to possess statues. They were trying to possess all of these different images that would bear the resemblance of the apparitional soul. This is what their theory, the working theory was. That's why in the Apocryphon of John, there was a Coptic manuscript. It says that these beings were appearing to women in the images of their lovers. It is absolutely no different than UFO abduction phenomenon. The pathology, the victimology it's the very same. And
although I would say that a lot of abduction experiences aren't that. A lot are just being brought on a craft. Having a kind of a communion with the other, whatever it is, and learning things, being shown things, and positive messages and what have you, and then being brought back. I mean, not all of them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about the hybridization program, right? I mean, I'm not saying like every abduction account, is
no, right. So that makes me wonder, like, is there evidence of in demonology of these demon entities, visiting, but not doing the horrific acts that we imagine?
Well,
are there more benign interactions?
Not really. Now, here's what's unique about it. This is why they classified demonology. Okay, that's negative, but in angelology, absolutely, there were great events, great experiences taking place. But what we've noticed throughout the years, even with Dr. Collar Turner's book, The Masquerade of Angels, is that the phenomenon will claim something. Oh, this is all good. It's all benevolent. We're good. And meanwhile, we're like, okay, well, what are you even doing?
Right.
Where it's almost like a way to just kind of navigate around the real issues. This is why in Dr. Collar Turner's book, The Masquerade of Angels, one of her experiencers asked them, "Are you angels?" "Yes, we are." "Why would you say that?" "Okay, then what are you doing?" "Yeah, but we're not angels like you've been taught." So there are times, and I'll get to another case study with Ariel Masters' work, where the phenomenon, again, okay, yeah, I'll be that. Why?
Well, okay. So angels, there are different interpretations of what angels are. One could, from a theological study, one can say angels are really pretty neutral. They're not. They're more like machines than they are human-like. They don't have the same kind of emotional range. They're not necessarily evil or good. They're just kind of doing God's will, right? So I mean, that's like one, and then there's the other vision of that they're glowing with beautiful light and love and that sort of thing. So I mean, those are just two in today's religious traditions.
Exactly. Yeah.
Two different ways of interpreting them. Yeah.
It is. And what I think is so fascinating too, it gets back to the disincarnate consciousness aspect of it. In the Ugaritic text from which the Hebrews got their mythologies, especially about angels, they have what are called malakuma. And malakuma, again, were deceased ancestors that when they died, they evolved into this new being. And so that became the malakim in Jewish literature. This is why it's so fair. This is why the New Testament, I don't want to get on the theology real quick, but I'll just say this real quick and I'll end that portion of it.
Theology is welcome here any day.
Okay, cool. Yeah. But this is why when Peter's family, Apostle Peter, they thought he had died and he's knocking on their door, they freaked out and they said, "This must be his angel. It's his angel." Why? Why would they think his angel looked identical to him? So there is this consciousness aspect of their belief that does bode well the theory that, okay, at least some of these people believed, either angels or demons, either one, they're potentially disincarnate human beings. And there's other texts for that.
So what does that mean then? Are
Consciousness.
these things doing evil deeds?
Well, here's the problem. When again we get into morality, what would we consider to be evil? I mean, let me put it this way. People
Okay,
always say,
well, let me put it within the
Okay.
theological context.
Mhm.
Okay, so are they doing the good work of,
God?
God?
Oh, no. I mean, it's like, okay, what kind of an angel would probe a 6-year-old? I mean, let's be real. What kind of an angel would pull you out of your own body, possess your own body? Not really biblical.
So you're definitely not, you're obviously not a literalist, because like I was saying earlier,
Mhm.
it would seem that they would have to get some kind of permission.
This is
Right.
where this is where I kind of differ from a lot of the demonologists in the field, is that whatever we're dealing with, it's eclipsing the microcosm of not just demonology, but ufology. And again, we're lacking the vocabulary to articulate the nuanced position this phenomenon deserves. But whatever we're dealing with, it has played the role of everything to us. That's why I believe it's a singular intelligence. But let me get back to Eros and Evil. Like I said, it will play a role. It will facilitate that for you as a theatrical performance until there's a skip, until either their technology fails or we're no longer willing to play it, and then something takes effect. And Steve Mayer and Barry Fitzgerald calls this a mechanism of reveal, where the phenomenon says, "Uh-oh, I can't play that anymore, can I?" Nope. And now you're in front of what's really occurring and what's really going on. So in Eros and Evil, it talks about, it's witcher literature, but it talks about how these demons, I'm just going to say this, the phenomenon would put on the mask of a demon and they would abduct witches. Now, it's not just Nathaniels' verbiage here. Literally, they were called demonic flights because these people really believed, okay, yes, I'm flying with these beings. And so these beings would fly them out to some lonely lover's lane or some witch's sabbat, and these beings would copulate with them. And so you'd have a group of them, and you would have in witcher literature, they said, okay, there were corpses, there were demons. And so a lot of times, what would happen is that during the copulation, the technology that was being employed would fail. And for a fleeting moment, these people would look around and realize that these are not demons, and these are not corpses. They were being poked and prodded by metallic objects. Metallic objects that were cold to the touch. Guess what they were doing, Alan? Taking seed and implanting it into women. So there is this weird protocol of belief that sometimes the phenomenon will induce us and then it'll be a theatrical performance, if you will.
Yeah. Oh, see, then it could be the inverse, right? Because I mean, you have people who are religious saying these are aliens are actually demons and XYZ, which we've kind of covered here tonight. But then the reverse can be said that it's just that you're misinterpreting extraterrestrials or ultra-terrestrials. It's a misinterpretation. They're not like any kind of divine entity. They're not some kind of byproduct of angels or fallen angels or anything like that.
Right. Well, the problem is that they're now starting to teach doctrine. When you have your leading experiencer saying that Ra is God, or that Thoth is God, or that some Egyptian deity is God, or that I got a phone call and now I can go into churches and lay hands on people, what that's doing, and people might not like it, but watch this. What that's doing is blurring the line between religiosity in this subject. And that's when I'm like, wait a minute, that's very strange. I flew thousands of miles to tell you that a religious system, it's very, again, this gets back to the esoteric nature of the phenomenon. There's something wrong with the current model, is what I'm saying.
Right. And now his name is slipping my head, but he was kind of friends with David Wilcox. And there was those videos came out of a deposition he had. And he had to pretty much admit that all his literature was essentially fictionalized, his alien encounter. Anyone listening, maybe Angel, maybe you'll remember who I'm talking about. His name is slipping my mind, but this happens where I think you do have people who are actual experiencers. and they come back and they change the message, though. The human does, and
Yes.
that's also how I interpret the Bible, right?
Right.
Because no matter how many priests tell me that it's the word of God, I know that human beings
Mhm.
wrote this down first
Mhm.
after they told each other stories, and we are a faulty,
100%.
we've got plenty of character defects, to go around, no
Mhm.
matter what the age is. And so people can change the story a little bit. You can embellish a little bit. You can alter just enough so that it works with your own, like you said, your own morality, whatever that might be.
Mhm.
And so I think modern day alien abduction experiencers do that as well. They come back and
Mhm.
they embellish and they build a kind of a mythology that wasn't
Oh,
necessarily
yeah, yeah.
there in the actual experience.
Correct. And this is another hypothesis that some of my heroes and I are pitching, discussing.
Hmm.
Why is it that way? We know for a fact now, because of the case studies, that when an experiencer meets these beings or the phenomenon manifests to them, that
Hmm.
in many cases the phenomenon can dictate what that experiencer remembers and how they interpret the memory. Which, again, how much power does this intelligence have over us? When we have Dr. Carla Turner again saying, okay, this particular experiencer saw UFO, literally in her mind believed that she gave her friend binoculars and pulled out the telescope. Telescope was in the box the next morning. She didn't even have binoculars. But the phenomenon had given them that screen memory in order to hide. Now, here's a question I would like everybody to entertain. It's not what they're wanting us to remember that matters, it's what they're wanting us to forget.
Hmm.
And there are certainly case after case after case where, okay, yeah, this happened, even to the point where an assault occurred. And then when they get back home, we have to reinterpret it. It was a nice thing. I liked it. Or I agreed to it prehistory and pre-life. In what it seems to be, I know we're getting very close to the end, but I would
Hmm.
suggest to everybody this is what's happening. When we've had in the past, we've had them appear as Uncle Tommy and Dear and Edna, but in many cases we've snuffed them out to where they will zigzag when Dear and Edna wouldn't have, or they would do something that's antithetical to the historical record we have. Now what's happened is the program has introduced a new character to the game. We cannot vet the ET. A thousand different origins, a thousand different explanations, a thousand different reasons why they're here. They're
Hmm.
raising consciousness. Where are you at? Oh, we're there, we're here, we're over there. We cannot vet them. Now what we're doing is we're placing the weight of their words on the amount of phenomenon we can document when they're present. Bring a camera. This means what they're telling me is true. How do you know that? Well, we have it on film. Well, yeah, if John D had them on film, sure, he believed they were right too, until they weren't.
Until they
And then
weren't. Yeah.
and then you realized, wait a minute, has this been a game the entire time? What is actually occurring here?
Oh, by the
I
way,
know I'm
no,
go
sorry,
ahead, go ahead.
Corey Good was who I was referring to earlier.
Oh yeah, I remember him.
Yeah. Um, how many entities are there out there,
I have no
or at least
idea.
do you think different types and descriptions?
I have no idea. At this point in my research, I know it's going to be poo-pooed by many people who can watch this. It's okay.
You get used to
But
it, right?
oh, I don't really care at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the deal. In my mind, I believe we're dealing with serial intelligence, and the parapsychological field is starting to come to that same
Mhm.
conclusion. When Bigelow was on Skinwalker Ranch, they asked him, what did you experience? Everything: possession, demons, incubi, succubi,
Yeah.
aliens, ghosts. Why?
Right. I have to tell you, as time goes on, okay, so 1999, I was about 20 years old, I guess, when The Matrix came out.
Mhm,
And it was like mind blowing, like, oh my gosh, really stimulating intellectually.
mhm,
Like the idea of a simulation or that we're in some kind of computer game, right? But more maturely now, I'm actually starting to think that maybe we are in some kind of simulation. That one source, that quote unquote creator,
Correct.
it is the either whatever's behind the simulation or the simulation itself,
Mhm.
is giving the commands and creating the rules, and
Yeah.
because I
You
feel like
know,
it could explain a lot of this stuff. I
it
really do.
would. Whatever
Yeah.
we're dealing with. I mean, I think that what we're encountering, even with the paranormal, is a lot of times we're looking at the reality that we are just a subculture.
Hmm.
Whatever this is, we are a microcosm of the larger macrocosm. And sometimes we see an overlapping of events,
Yeah.
or sometimes the phenomenon will make eye contact. And then for that fleeting moment, we'll see, okay, that's what it really was. Or, like I said, witch literature, bam,
Right.
this
Right.
was it's not a corpse or a demon. What was it? The phenomenon putting on a theatrical performance for them in order to garner consent, just to make things easier. And that's what leads me to believe, like if all of this was love and light, why lie?
Hmm.
Why would you deceive me? Why would you appear, I mean, like what is really going on here? So the amount of deception at a certain point in my research, I was like, if this was well and good and we could comprehend it, just tell us. Don't have to lie to me. You don't have to
Well,
pull me out of my body and make me
yeah.
question if that was ethereal or not. So there's something that's weird.
I almost feel like it's not the idea of love. I do feel like it is a force unto itself, something
Yep.
that is binding and is like, in a sense, I say this loosely, the answer to, to all our questions.
Yeah,
Eh,
right.
but what I mean is that if whether we're in a program or whether the universe is like a multiverse and it's just one of you know gagillion, whatever versions of reality that have ever existed and ever will, and that we just got lucky in this one with the physics, that it evolved so that love became the primary end goal, meaning it didn't start necessarily like that,
Mhm.
but it evolved that way, and that's now the love is the end goal. That's the primary. So inherently, it was neutral. Good, bad, evil, all the same, didn't matter. The rules
Mhm.
didn't. But then, as time as a program evolved and became more sophisticated, love became a another running program within the overall system.
Mhm.
And then that's why it's like, how do we have this wonderful idea of love, and that this is like the saving grace? If that's true, then why are there all these bad things? I think for me, that's one way to kind of explain it, that love didn't come first. Like the universal
They
one love.
they okay. Yeah.
Like an amoeba, right? An amoeba is a single cell creature,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And then it split off into other creatures and became more complex. And then you had all these other systems that built off, right, of the single cells.
Mhm.
So maybe it's something like that. And then that way you can kind of get around, well, what if God's good, then how can this be?
Yeah,
Right.
that's something I get a lot of from my evangelical. I mean, I've got family that couldn't care less what I do and don't like it.
Mhm.
So I get a lot of that from them, like, well, if it is God, it's like, well, I don't know. I think that again, that knowing that these beings can make you feel whatever they want to,
Mhm.
they know, man, I mean, there's cases where they knew when people were gonna die, Alan.
That's right.
Or how about this one? They'll simulate a near-death experience and then threaten you. That doesn't fit. And it doesn't even fit within the framework of what I grew up in. And so I had to, and this is me personally, I had to just abandon the dogma and embrace the data.
Yeah.
And to be truthful, I mean, it's much more fascinating now.
All right. So really quick, I'm
I
gonna get a couple of
Yeah.
questions in for you
All right.
before so UFOT asks, any long-term percussion repercussions for people who routinely engage with this phenomena?
Don't. That's my thing. Don't. Look, and this is my perspective. We've got to get out of the 21st century narrative of what this phenomenon wants us to believe it is.
Hmm.
This is possible. It's possible we're only looking at its latest incarnation. If you want to know its pathology and victimology, go throughout history. It's the same thing. In order to see beyond the veil into the mask, you have to
Mhm.
look at the literature. And I can just tell you what I've been hearing lately, that yes, Bigelow's never going back to Skinwalker because look, it ruined a lot of people's lives. It
Mhm.
was just a bartering of technology where, hey, listen, pity us, we'll build you an altar, we'll give you worship, we'll pray, we'll do whatever you want us to do in order to get, access to your technology. But at what point, and what are we leveraging? And so that's really where a lot of my colleagues and I are at. But the thing is, okay, we don't know what they are. We don't know what their intentions are for us. We can only guess. We know what a lot of experiences are remembering, but again, are with those screen memories. Were first of all, were they out of body or were they in body? I mean, I can keep going down
Right.
this
No,
labyrinth
that's a
of.
great point, and we don't only have so much time, so I'm gonna get this
I
one
know.
last question
All
in.
right, man. Sorry, brother.
No, that's cool.
Oh my
So,
god.
from Caleb, he says, "I realize these entities wear masks in order to deceive. What is Nathaniel's
Yeah,
perspective on the list of demons in Isaiah 34:14? The desert creatures, wild
yeah.
beast, the satyr, goat demons, and Liliths."
Lilith's. Well, again, um, I call these protocols of belief because it's not enough for them to wear the mask. You have to believe in it. You
Mhm.
have to believe that that mask is actually an essential part of their existence.
Yeah.
So when I talk about Lilith, the Lilith spirit in Akkadian text, the Phoenician literature, it's consciousness. It's that afterlife moment that leaves the body, and that is again the
Mm.
necessity for a hybrid baby. I
Yeah.
want a baby that looks like my apparition. So that's what I believe they are. I believe that was one of the earliest attempts to place a face on the phenomenon. But I do believe that they and of themselves were programs, not people.
All right. Well, Caleb also continues, said, could these be the skinwalkers and the reptilian entities?
Yes, we've had cases where they've all been present and are doing the same things to the same people.
Hmm.
Or I had one case, where literally you're looking at them, and then
Yeah.
the individual said it turns, and you see that there was like just a cloak. You don't really see the entity. It's just
Yeah.
again. So yep.
Do you feel safe doing what you do?
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do anything else. Yeah, I love it, man. People ask me, do I get attachments? No, I had a really bad ex one time, but that's about it. Um,
Well, I guess
and
you're
we're no longer
detached. You're
attached.
detached now. So,
Woohoo! I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, honestly,
how much
no,
sage did you
man.
burn? Yeah.
Oh my
Um,
lord. Yeah, a whole field.
so, well, I mean, look, and that's what's the interesting part about this is love. I do think is at the center of healing and all of that, whether it's relationships um,
Right.
and entities or demons. But I can tell you, in the real world, what is probably unreconcilable as a demon or an alien abduction would be a narcissist,
Right.
and I noticed that there's very narcissistic qualities to a lot of these evil encounters and entities.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. The access to knowledge that they have is unprecedented.
yeah.
In Prague, they said that they had captured a demon that would walk around telling people when they were going to die. It's true.
That's I mean that's a power trip right there.
Yeah, I think, and people that know my work know I've talked about this before in lectures where they do have almost a serial killer pathology.
Hmm.
It's not enough that I know that, and this is very dark, but it's not enough that I know that so and so's father killed himself. I have to let that person know I pulled
Yeah,
the trigger.
right.
That's tapped in the head.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
messed up.
That's totally messed up. Exactly. If you can leave us on a light note, Nathaniel, what would it be?
um, not much. I think again they're playing by different rules because they're playing a different game,
Hmm.
and I differ with most demonologists. I think that whatever we're dealing with has been manipulating us as a species. But man, what a great time I've had with you, my friend, my new friend from New
Yeah.
York,
Thank you, brother. Yeah, me
and
too.
totally jelly that you get some nice pizza and I get Domino's.
Next time you come to New York, you gotta let me know though. We'll
I will,
definitely
man. I
definitely go out
will.
for
And
sure.
get me some good pizza. What is your favorite pizza in New York, by the way? Just FYI.
I, to be honest, I gotta be honest with you. My
You don't
favorite
eat pizza.
pizza is from New Jersey, so
Oh,
it is.
whoa!
I know.
Holy water. I'm just kidding, man.
Yeah. But yeah, well, there's plenty of
Awesome.
places. There's plenty of good places. We'll find something for you.
All right, man.
But yeah, so where do people find out about your work, what you're doing?
So I'm all over YouTube. I have a YouTube channel. It's Nathaniel Gillis, and I have an Instagram page. I don't have a website. I've got too much work to do. I'm a very simple guy. I'm a minimalist. So just follow me on YouTube. Follow me on Instagram. That's it.
All right, Nathaniel, thank you so much, man.
Thank you, sir. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for all the new faces, for joining us on Mystic Lounge. I appreciate you. If you want to hang around this channel, please comment, like. I'd love to hear your feedback on tonight's discussion. And of course, if you missed tonight's broadcast, you can always recatch it on the UnX network at 11 p.m. Pacific time on Thursday nights and 2 a.m. Eastern time on Friday nights, Friday mornings. So that's where we'll be. Special thanks to Margie K and Race Hobbs. And until next time, peace and love.